Okay, I want you to imagine an explosion so massive that it sinks an entire oil rig, and for 87 straight days, it unleashes this underwater volcano of oil. Sounds like a movie, right? Well, it's exactly what happened back in 2010 with the Deepwater Horizon. So today, we're going to break down the story behind one of the worst environmental disasters in history.
All right, let's set the scene. The date is April 20th, 2010, and we are way out in the Gulf of Mexico. We're talking about this incredible piece of technology, a floating city of steel called the Deepwater Horizon oil rig, stationed about 41 miles off the coast of Louisiana.
Now, to give you an idea of what they were dealing with, this rig was drilling in water that was 5,000 feet deep. That is almost a full mile straight down. It's so deep and dark down there, it's practically another planet, which, as you'll see, made what happened next an absolute nightmare to fix. So how did this incredible piece of engineering turn into a giant, raging inferno? Let's get into the chain of events that kicked this whole thing off. It all happened so fast. A massive bubble of high-pressure gas shot up from the well and just erupted. The whole rig became a fireball. Tragically, 11 workers never made it home. For over a day, the rig just burned and burned before it finally gave way and sank to the bottom of the Gulf. And as it went down, it snapped the pipe connecting it to the well, leaving it wide open on the seafloor. So the fire was out, which was good. But a new, much quieter disaster was just getting started, a mile beneath the waves. So what was actually gushing out of this broken pipe? Crude oil. Just think of it as the raw, thick goop that comes straight out of the earth. It is super toxic, and you know how oil and water don't mix? Well, this stuff just spreads out into a massive, sticky, poisonous mess.
For 87 days, for nearly 3 months, that well just bled oil into the ocean. It was a non-stop gusher, an underwater oil volcano that no one knew how to turn off. And the amount of oil, it's just mind-boggling. Over those 87 days, more than 4 million barrels of oil poured into the Gulf of Mexico. It became the largest accidental oil spill in history.
So, the obvious question is, why was it so hard to stop? Well, I want you to imagine trying to put a cap on a fire hydrant that's blasting water. Except this fire hydrant is a mile underwater in pitch-black darkness under crushing pressure, and you can only use remote-controlled robots to do the job. It was an engineering challenge that no one had ever faced before.
Now, this underwater problem didn't stay underwater. It spread, creating a crisis for the entire Gulf region, impacting both the incredible wildlife and, of course, the people who call that place home. For the wildlife, the oil was a death sentence. You had birds so coated in that thick sludge they couldn't fly or even stay warm. Sea turtles and dolphins were poisoned by the oil and the toxic fumes. The damage went all the way down the food chain, and we even saw that fish born years after the spill had serious health problems. It was just this horrible domino effect of destruction.
And the damage didn't even stop at the shoreline. The oil washed into these vital coastal wetlands, the marshes that act like the Gulf's natural shield against storms. The oil just choked the life out of the plants, and without their roots holding everything together, the land itself just started to erode and wash away into the sea.
And you have to remember, this wasn't just an environmental disaster. It was a total economic catastrophe. Fishing boats couldn't go out. The beaches were covered in tar. And all the restaurants and local businesses that depend on fishing and tourism, they were devastated. An entire way of life was suddenly at risk.
So with the Gulf in an absolute crisis, the whole world was watching and asking the same question. How on earth do you even begin to clean up a mess this big?
One of the main weapons in the cleanup was a type of chemical called a dispersant. The easiest way to think about it is like a super-powered dish soap. You know how soap breaks up grease on a dirty pan? Well, dispersants do the same thing to oil, breaking it into tiny droplets to help it, well, disperse.
Right, the idea was to break up the oil slicks on the surface to try and keep as much of that black sludge off the beautiful beaches as possible. And they used a ton of it, over 1 million gallons. But here's the catch. Many scientists were worried that the dispersants themselves could be toxic to sea life, possibly creating a whole new kind of problem deep in the ocean. Beyond chemicals, the physical cleanup was just this massive all-hands-on-deck effort. You had thousands of boats laying out these long floating barriers to trap the oil, with other ships skimming it off the surface. On the beaches, armies of workers literally scooped up oily sand by hand, and then you had these incredible volunteers carefully washing the toxic oil off of terrified birds and turtles, one by one. So after all of that, what did we learn from this absolute nightmare? And, maybe more importantly, what's changed to try and make sure something like this never, ever happens again? Well, for one thing, scientists discovered something pretty disturbing. A lot of that oil that was broken up by the dispersants didn't just disappear. It mixed with particles in the water and fell to the ocean floor, creating this toxic layer they called oily snow. It basically smothered the deep-sea habitat, and we are still studying the long-term damage today. The disaster was also a huge wake-up call for the entire oil industry. In response, a whole bunch of new safety regulations were put in place. Now there are much tougher inspections, better emergency plans, and new technologies that have been developed specifically to stop a leak like this much, much faster.
But maybe the biggest lesson from the whole thing was less about technology and more about us. It was just this brutal, powerful reminder of the enormous risks that come with our global reliance on fossil fuels.
So that's really the final takeaway here. Yes, the Deepwater Horizon disaster forced us to make deep-sea drilling safer, but it also left us all with a much bigger question. What does it teach us about the real cost of the energy we depend on every single day? It's a question that we're all still trying to answer.